Welcome to this episode of the Historical Fencer podcast. Today we have a very special treat for you. One of the most well-known researchers in historical fencing is calling in all the way from New Orleans, Jean Chandler. We'll be talking about a whole bunch of interesting stuff regarding research and what it means to be a fencer. With me, as always, is the levitating popsicle, Axel Pettersson.
Is it getting worse and worse? Hi.
This is Anders Linnad. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
You are here on a matter of honor. I am here to assure you settle it honorably.
Junkerte Lehrer, Gottlieb haben, Frauen ja Herren, so extra.
I see you handle your weapon well.
I have been known to keep my tip up.
Why don't you make it up like a couple of good fellows?
Don't expect these.
You ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man.
You ready, gentlemen?
Hey, Sean.
What the hell was all of that?
That was from the Terminator.
Oh, okay.
You don't know that? Is it? Axel started laughing right in my introduction.
He didn't tell me we do that.
I never tell him anything.
So you called him a popsicle.
Yeah. That's because So let me start with the. I'll explain that in a bit. Let me start with the most Swedish question that there is. What's the weather like over there?
I bet it's wonderful.
It's a pertinent question right now. It's been about almost 2 months of continuous hurricanes, and I don't mean to laugh, but it's like every one of them starts off aimed at us and then veers off, and it's like I saw a meme on the social media where New Orleans is depicted as a woman with somebody's throwing knives at a carnival, and the knives are all around her. She looks kind of nervous, but
Wow.
they've wrecked a medium-sized town. Wow. To our west, which I think Axel, Lake Charles was just wiped out. They still don't have power. It's been a month.
Oh yeah,
and they wrecked Mobile and part of Pensacola. And I mean, I'm saying the weather.
How's
and now Houston's flooding today. Apparently,
how's
and it's coming to us. Although we're probably going to ride it out okay.
How's Baton Rouge?
They're horrible, but they're fine. They haven't been hit.
I'm
Baton
sorry
Rouge
to hear that.
is still just swirling in its tedium.
Oh, okay. I'm asking. I've got family and friends down there. I actually spend a lot of time in Louisiana, so I had to know.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. That's a shame. Baton Rouge. It's they're studying, the agriculture college up there. They're learning about chicken milking and how grass grows and how to put more glyphosate in the sugar cane and whatever.
Yeah, we started this podcast by wearing off into strange territory almost immediately.
Well, maybe we should take it back to how we all first met.
Yeah, that's a good good point.
Yeah. Well, we didn't know each other online, mid 2000, Sean, because everyone's on the same fencing forums, right? And and then we met the first time at the Houston International Open Gathering, I think it was called, in Houston.
Yeah, it was called the Hammertet.
That's right.
That was a very long, cumbersome name that I still can't pronounce.
Hammertet? It was named after a HEMA magazine run by Christoph Amberg.
Yeah, one of the early venues.
Yeah, so Scott Brown named after that. And I was so impressed because, well, first of all, we kind of fell in love with you and your friends from New Orleans. You guys were amazing. And but your fight with Lopez Cardoso, do you remember that?
Yeah, vaguely.
Yeah, for me it was the representation of the principle of when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. That was the fight between you and Lopez. I was kind of in awe of that fight. It was just so much power, and ever since then I really liked you.
Two super strong brawlers.
It was fun. I remember that. I should have taken your advice. I think one of y'all told me, he goes in a straight line, and I should have gone to the side. But he was pissing me off. But I couldn't break him down. So
Yeah, the whole thing about he's the levitating popsicle was that he was actually doing. I wanted to ask Axel about this because last time in the last episode he told us that he was doing what was it called?
Cryotherapy. They put you in a really cold box.
Like minus 150
you're getting into all that
degrees.
weird fitness shit, huh?
I am. I've been listening way too much to Joe Rogan, and here I am.
Are you doing Wim Hof breathing?
You're kidding? Twice a day, man.
Really? Is it working? Is it help?
It actually works really, really well.
Is that guy's name actually Wim Hof? Because that sort of sounds like a sword cutting air, like Wim Hof.
Yeah.
It sounds like breathing.
Yeah. He's just the right man in the right place. No, Wim Hof breathing method, it actually really works well. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I actually do it too. When I can't sleep in the evenings, I do that simple breathing exercise. 3 rounds or whatever it's called. Is it a round or something like that. So and then you get really relaxed. So it's pretty cool. Yeah. So yeah, like in our previous episodes, we've talked about what I call the pillars of HEMA. We've talked about the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, which is basically training and teaching, competitions, and the culture. But we haven't really gotten into the first pillar, which is the academic studies of it. So I was sort of hoping that we could talk a little bit about that with you, since you've done so much research. Which has helped a lot of people to understand better the context of historical fencing, I think.
Yeah. Shawnee, what we're after a little bit is, I remember Anders and I said this to each other after the first time we met you, and it's been reinforced, because I've met you a number of times at events across America since then. You came
visit us, remember?
I did, yeah. When I did that road trip from Washington to Houston. Yeah, it was some awesome time. I really want to go back to New Orleans. But
I remember you guys got lost in New Orleans East. We thought y'all were going to get killed.
Yeah, that was...
And then you made it. You finally came from the Damnation Alley zone and then to the nice pub. And we all had a great time.
We were like the epitome of the naive Scandinavian tourist. Like, this sounds like a very nice place. However we sound to you.
Yeah, New Orleans East is dicey, brother.
We had a great time. But, the thing we really liked about you is how you are able to make history come alive. I think, Anders, you have a phrase for this.
I do.
Yeah, you said that Sean Reed talks about about history the way, like...
Yeah, like the people, like in a way, like, sort of like a gang. You view history like a gangster views history. It feels like someone who just understands it on a more fundamental level. Like all of these warlords and all these people who lived more maybe in touch with their violent sides and stuff. I remember you did this whole. Not dialogue, but a monologue about some king who did all these awesome things. And it was like an hour of me and Axel laying on the floor just laughing at these stories, because it was like, man, he did this. And then I can't do your accent, but telling that story like you were there. And that sort of ties into something that we discussed in the last episode where, academic studies can easily become something static where you're collecting data points instead of applying it. And I think, and like Axel said in the last episode, HEMA is sort of the not the biggest, but one of the most anti-intellectual, anti-academic movements of our time, because we decided to not just study the arts as an academic thing. We decided to study them as martial arts.
To live them in a way.
To live them in a way, right. And the same with academic studies then. How do we approach that, and how do we really, really understand it and sort of internalize the knowledge that we gather about the periods that we're studying?
Yeah, so we want you to talk to us like that, Sean Ree.
All the time.
Yeah, I get feedback about the colloquial or informal way that I approach history, not only when we're just hanging around talking, but when I do, I've done a couple of peer-reviewed academic articles, or when I do this lectures and stuff, books, etc. And that's my voice, so that's what's easiest for me. Some people really like it, some people are put off by it. But I think that one of the things that I've come to perceive in trying to understand this period that for me, like a lot of us, since a kid, I was always interested in this whole era of sword fighting and everything, and I found it hard to get to. And HEMA, these fencing manuals, these pictures and whatnot, they take us right into the middle of it. We don't know how to get back there from that place, but it gives us another point of reference. So I've been very drawn to that from the beginning. But I've come to realize that I think, or maybe it's just because I'm getting infected with medieval thinking, that just like we have a lot of the fencing masters are looking at how ways different people fight based on the four humors and the more or less the different personality types. I think it applies to researchers too. So you've got some researchers that are melancholic and very meticulous, and they just can't stand to have a single dot out of place. And they can be very effective at understanding certain, data sets and so forth. But they can be challenged when they're entering into a world that you can't really see all the parameters. You walk into something like the Middle Ages, and it's a kaleidoscope, and it's really hard to tell what the rules are and what the meaning of even simple concepts are, because there's always 10 meanings in the Middle Ages. For me, I'm more like a sanguine type. I'm more intuitive, a little bit extroverted. I probably got a little bit of the other, it's never just one personality type. I probably got a little melancholic in me too, but I approach this stuff from an intuitive perception, and I always been interested in history, and I relate it back to my life experiences, and that's another thing, and it's very common in HEMA. Whatever you're coming from, you bring in that to HEMA, and some people get very jingoistic about it. You come from a Japanese fencing background, or Filipino martial arts, or collegiate fencing, or I don't know, mensur or whatever, and you're going to bring that perception, to it. And my perception is kind of from a chaotic period in my young adulthood. Napoleon said, if you want to understand a man, look at the world when he was 20, where he was living when he was when he was 20. So, and for me, there was a certain amount of violence going on, and so I could definitely relate on that level.
Yeah. So what were we've spoken about this before, so I have a rough idea about what that was. But what is your experience with violence? Is that something you're comfortable talking about?
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I'll give you like a brief overview of it. And it's just that, and this is true for Henry, who you also met too, who came and fought, and I think did pretty well at Swordfish.
Henry Rhodes.
A bunch of us. I was a kid. I was a punk rocker back in the 80s, and that wasn't a very popular thing. That like today, if you have a mohawk or something, that's a sign of like a Chad. That's so mainstream. The tattoos, all that stuff. But then it was really a break with how everybody else looked, and there was a very interesting kind of social reaction to being at all different. It really in the 80s, and especially the earlier 80s, just even having short hair. Unless you were like a preppy. But if you didn't fit in one of these slots, you looked slightly different, because we didn't look all that different. We weren't like cliche punks like you see with, lots of bondage gear and, crazy makeup and everything. We had just sort of had short hair and boots and maybe, a band T-shirt or something. I mean, I couldn't afford a leather jacket or anything like that. Mm. But just that difference really made you a target, which was a downside. It was very unpleasant because, as a little kid, I was quite afraid of violence. And, but they had a huge advantage that we don't have today. And it's really hard for kids today in the sense that by doing that, if I didn't want to talk about a lot of things that were really popular, if I wasn't interested in the Love Boat and Fantasy Island and He-Man and Monday Night Football and all these things that everybody was really deeply into and didn't necessarily listen to the same kind of music or whatever, just by slightly changing my appearance, this really helped me. A lot of those kind of people that were interested or that were sort of just saturated in this pop culture that I couldn't stand would stay away from me. And I could talk to people who were a little more like me. I had a little bit more of a different perspective on things. But unfortunately, the downside was that it was violent. And New Orleans became, where I grew up, became very violent. And I was in the Army for a little while. When I come back from the Army, things had gotten worse here, and there was like a crack epidemic that was starting up, and there was an economic downturn, and so it got kind of hairy, and people would sometimes attack us. There was a lot of we hung out, and I grew up in this sort of red light district called the French Quarter, and there was just a variety of dangerous people. A lot of people that were just drunk. They were kind of predatory criminals. There was, just a lot of mayhem. And we always tried to avoid fighting, but eventually, we would run away, got really good at running away and hopping fences and, but sometimes you get cornered and you had to fight. And so after a while, we got more used to that. And some of us, started to become kind of brawlers. And the thing that was good about the punk scene is that they had a very healthy sense of lèse-majesté toward everything and everybody. And so if you were the guys there was a few of us that would do most of the fighting. And, but that didn't really give you any status. Like the punk scene here at that time, it was like whoever's the most sarcastic, the wittiest, the funniest, that was the people who were respected.
So the guy who got you into the fights got the credit.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, everybody would help though, and you had a role. Everybody tried to do what they could. Just that, we all lived in these crash pads and stuff, and sometimes squats. Although it wasn't quite like the homeless thing that you see kids now. We took baths. It was a different deal than the gutter punks and stuff. I don't really get that, but we stayed away from some of the harder drugs. We kind of had some rules about that because it's very dangerous if you're poor. If you're rich, you can afford a cocaine habit. If you're just about destitute, you really can't. It's very dangerous, especially in a place where it's there's just a lot of pitfalls. Like New Orleans is sort of like an adult emphasis on both meanings of the word adult Disneyland with no guardrails. So it's fun. It's a lot of fun. You can walk around and just all kind of amusing and entertaining things to do, and some of them maybe pushing the limits of your life, but you can go right off the rails and you wouldn't know that you're right next to the edge.
Yeah.
So it's a weird place, and a lot of fun. I mean, it was great. It was a blast, but there was a certain amount of crazy violence. And eventually I got to where I liked it. I just liked fighting. It was fun. And we fought a lot too, which is another thing I relate to in the medieval sense, because that's how you learn how to fight. We played this sort of fake sword fighting. We used to do a lot of that. We called it sham battles. And it was a great way to get used to getting smacked in the head, and not getting rattled,
So did this because the way that you're describing it is that you were a little group, an in-group where you stood out against the rest of society, and what that tells me is that there's a connection here to the medieval sort of decentralized strong monarch rule, where there are these scraps going on, especially maybe in the German-speaking areas, where different lords or minor nobles and different areas have conflicts going on with each other. So it becomes like when you're having a little in-group like this in the modern world, it becomes sort of similar, with turf wars, with all of this. Is that something that you could relate to maybe? And is that how you... Yeah,
sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is something that you feel in New Orleans anyway, because New Orleans is very out of sync with the United States in a lot of ways. I mean, Louisiana has Napoleonic law. New Orleans didn't follow a lot of the federal law. Like, they tried to make us raise the drinking age. They wouldn't do it. They were always sending federal prosecutors down here to try to get a grip on things and make us be American. And we were always resistant to that. There's a lot of things we didn't like about Americans. We liked our own way of doing things. And they have this concept down here of Creole, which is, it's a really interesting concept. I think it relates a lot to the medieval world, which is, it's like there's all these factions in New Orleans. New Orleans is a place where a lot of exiles came from the rest of the United States, especially people that had a Catholic background. So there's, Croatians, French, Italians, there's Vietnamese, there's German Catholics. There's all kinds of people from that just weren't really fitting into the other parts of the U.S. And we have this shared culture, like things like carnival, where everybody has their own version of carnival and everybody has their own music and diet and, the weird traditions and everything that they try to keep it together in their own corner of New Orleans for themselves, for their own community. They try to keep it, kind of clean. Like they keep it to kind of be traditional, but then they mix it together. It's carnival and a lot of we have all these other parties, like New Orleans is a place where people don't have a lot of ambition. You're trying to make something of your life and become a real important force in the world. You go to California or maybe New York or something, but New Orleans is where look, I'm going to live a job and I'm going to have a lot of fun while I'm living, Americans come to New Orleans, they go to a store, they're in a hurry, they try to be brusque and rush people through the process of buying their loaf of bread or their iPhone, and people give them grief. If you don't stop and flirt a little bit and, hey baby, how you doing? What's, like people get irritated. Like, man, I got to sit here all day doing this job. I want to have fun. Carnival is a time when everybody comes out of their corners and presents what they've got. Here's the weird, Italian stuff. Here's like St. Joseph's Day. They used to brawl all the different factions, the Irish, the Italians, certain African American groups that dress up like Indians. And now it's just a contest of who has the best party and has the coolest shit. And the Italians march around with they're Sicilians, they march around with these giant altars just right out of the Middle Ages, like a huge altar covered in food for St. Joseph's Day.
I was just about to say, because this sounds exactly like the medieval carnivals, and some of them are, of course, in various places in Europe still going on as well.
Exactly, yeah, a lot more than people think, a lot more than people realize. And there's urban and rural versions. We have that too, like in around Lafayette and north of there, Mamou and Eunice and Church Point. They have a place, I still haven't seen it yet, but one of the Cajun little towns, they do like horseback lance drill, sort of like they stab rings and stuff. They fight I think if I remember correctly, they would stab rings that represent the 7 enemies of cotton, which are like drought, famine, the boll weevil, polyester, and rayon or something like that. And that's part of their carnival. So everybody's bringing their own thing. So like here we have this like mutual respect. Like, wow, the Croatians make the best grilled oysters. They just do it better than anybody else. There's no doubt about it. And the Vietnamese are starting to make bread that's hopefully going to keep the tradition of the bread that we do, here for a long time alive, and people really respect that. And so that was the thing. You have all these factions and you kind of earn a grudging respect, and then there's some that are just totally negative. Like in the French Quarter, it's the mafia, or there's bikers. And I'm not trying to say anything bad about bikers. I just had, we had trouble with some of the real, the 1% type ones. And I've heard some funny stories from you guys about that, in Sweden too, but like, I personally, I don't, it's like Bukowski said about people in general. Like I don't have anything against them. I just feel more comfortable when I'm not around them, you know?
Yeah. That's actually funny that you mentioned the bikers, because I wrote an article a couple of years back called Modernity in Fencing, where I basically spoke about how a lot of us are protective from these types of violent encounters. I mean, not you, obviously, but even though I had been in violent encounters in my youth as well, when I was maybe 20 years old, I ran into a biker gang, and that scared me, that encounter, because I got beaten up. But the thing that really scared me, in contrast to previous episodes, was that, first of all, it was a real fight. It wasn't just I'd had some guy smack me in the face with a bottle when I was 18 and broke my jaw, but that was sort of an assault from behind. It wasn't really a fight. But this time I was facing him and I was supposed to fight him, and I'd pushed him to the ground because he was beating up my friend, and there were other bikers there as well, and everything was at stake. And I felt that I failed because I froze up. I parried a few blows, and then he knocked me over my nose, broke it, and I was on the ground. And and he actually stopped that. So it wasn't that I got a thorough thrashing and they stomped me while I was down or anything like that. But I just realized when facing him, he was so much more in touch with his violent side than I was. I couldn't just switch that on because I'd been fostered in my attitude was, basically that it would be the mature thing to walk away. Or I wasn't fostered in a culture, and this is one of the differences, I think, between most historical periods throughout history of mankind, that in more of an honor culture, you would, if you got into a fight and ran away, that was a shameful thing, and not the sensible thing to do. Like you were supposed to stand your ground.
If I can bring in there.
4 or 6, right?
No, I just wanted to say that, given some of the feedback we got from the first episode, when we talk about an honor culture in this sense, it's not that you have to be pompous, with a stick up your butt and resort to violence all the time. It's simply that your safety is more reliant on your own capacity rather than the state's. And that kind of requires you to act in this fashion. So I think what Anders is saying now is really on point. And I think maybe, Chandler, that's why your perspective on history is often felt so relatable and fascinating to me, because given your upbringing, you understand these very natural human behaviors and like the structures of powers and violence and how they plays out. That was my analysis when I first started to hear you talk about history. At least it makes it feel so human in a way. Now I'm listening to Herodotus, the Histories, right now. And that's
great.
It's great. And it's some stuffy Englishman who reads it. And it works out because that stuffy Englishman probably fought in like at least one of the world wars, but I've been catching myself thinking that I want you to read Herodotus' Histories.
I love Herodotus. I have a great anecdote about this I want to tell you. But, But let me address a couple things. First off, I want to make clear, I don't think I've been in a fight in 15 or 20 years. I mean, it's been a long time. And I grew up in basically middle-class life. So it was like a period of my youth, 4 or 5 years where there was a lot of fighting, and it kind of tapered off once I got, as we call it, an air conditioning job. And so, I have a very peaceful life now. I'm certainly not looking for violence. And so I just want to be clear about that. I'm not trying to claim to be some kind of tough guy, but I do agree with what you're saying about, I think the way I describe it in the United States, it's very strange. There's a very weird moment we're in where there's still an incredible amount of violence around the United States, but it's, the world is divided between what I call the comfortable and the uncomfortable, So I lived a little while in the uncomfortable world, and a lot of people live there, and we've made an insulation by kind of having a 2-tiered law enforcement system, which has become a big issue here in the States recently, but I think it's everywhere, and different norms, in terms of how violence is dealt with, and other crimes and other transgressions and so on. There's a lot of things that are crimes and transgressive from one point of view and aren't from another. Like here in the States, we had this thing with marijuana where when I was a kid, if you got caught with just a single joint, you could go spend a year in some dungeon that was probably worse than what you see in the Middle Ages in most cases, or worse or more, So, and that was very weird because in certain parts of town, New Orleans, man, nobody thought that was wrong. There's nothing wrong with smoking a joint, as most people feel today, I think, at least more people. Not that I'm not trying to be one of these pothead, evangelicals or anything. I'm just making a general point that, there was sort of there was a very harsh punishment and sort of almost like a guerrilla war suppression or anti-guerrilla war that was going on over a lot of things that, a lot of people that didn't really see it as a crime. That's kind of one of the things we face here.
That sort of reminds me a little bit about the medieval period as well, because when you see, especially that period in Sweden between 1450 and 1550, where you're going from a sort of decentralized system towards a monarch, like in a military organizational sort of way as well, you're going from, pooling soldiers from the peasantry to a large degree towards more having an army tied to the king. And when you describe the U.S., what I'm hearing is this big country with a lot of states where there are tons of different cultures, where the norms of the various smaller places are trying to be subdued or controlled or, funneled towards one sort of culture under that. And that reminds me of the centralization of there's a clear similarity in my mind between the kings trying to centralize the state and what you're describing in the U.S.
Yeah, I want to break in again there and just air a pet peeve of mine that I have. Sorry, coming in from left field here, but there is nothing that can aggravate me more than Europeans dismissing American culture. Of course, it's a mainstreaming in American culture, just like you say, Anders. But they did that in France too, they run that in most countries that develop toward nation states. But when some European goes up and says, America has no culture, it's because they've been watching, some really poor Netflix show, or they went to New York once, But if you've been to America or lived there and traveled across the states, you can see how wildly different it is.
And we also do it to piss off Americans, of course.
Yeah, but it's getting old.
Yeah, it is.
It's pretty old, and we got plenty of McDonald's over here too.
Yeah,
absolutely. I know it's kind of like our Eurotrash jokes. I mean, I talk about Barbie Girl, but nobody's even heard it anymore.
Hey, don't you ever dare talk bad about Barbie Girl.
I'm just going to cut you off here now. Speaking ill of Barbie Girl.
Oh, sorry.
No, of course not. No.
Go on, Sean.
I think there is this thing that you were alluding to, which is the constant process of state building, and that existed in the Middle Ages, not only with the emergent monarchies like you see in France and England, and later in Spain. But also on the smaller scale with all the princes, in the Holy Roman Empire and in Italy and other places, you have these local states or trying to be a state, that were and that ties in with another concept that I thought of when you were talking about the fights you got into, Anders, which sound pretty rough to me, man. Getting a broken jaw, that's no joke. But is that when we were kids in the quarter, one of the things that made things a little dicey, but we adapted to, was the fact that there are multiple different standards and sets of rules, so to speak, for violence, and there's scaled violence. When I was reading Anne Solicity's Martial Ethic in Early Modern Germany, and they were talking about this idea of scaled violence, or I'm not sure if she used that term, but I was recognizing, I was like, man, I got to explain this to the HEMA people, because I instantly recognized that, because that's the difference in all different kinds of fights that you would get into in the French Quarter when I was a kid, or in other parts of New Orleans. It really depends where you're at and who you're contangling with. And one of the things that was scary about bikers or some of the criminals, other criminal element, was that they lived a life where they kind of expected to go to prison, doing time in prison. It's one thing to do 30 days in the parish jail. Okay, it's like a county jail. It's a totally different thing to go to Angola, which is our state prison, one of our big ones. And a lot of us, like myself especially, were very motivated to stay out of prison. So we knew there were certain things in a fight you could get away with. Like if you hit somebody with a bottle, like happened to you, or somebody bottled you in the head, that's one thing. But if you broke a bottle and you stuck it in somebody, that's a whole nother thing. And so we knew it wasn't so much necessarily discussed. It's not like anybody gave us a rule sheet on here's the things you can and can't do in a brawl on Decatur Street in front of the Abbey or something. But we knew what those rules were. And we kind of also had a sense usually of who would play by different rules. And that's why those kind of people were scarier. Sometimes they might not be necessarily better fighters or anything, but they're playing in a different way. And the same thing could also happen if, it's one thing if you're standing in front of a bar and there's a bunch of people around, lots of potential witnesses, maybe there's some cops doing a beat, job, whether working as a security guard. It was very common then. You don't want to stab somebody in front of all that, right? Or curb kick somebody or something like that. But if you're walking home, that's the same night, And now you're 10, 15 blocks away, and you're in a quiet, kind of desolate neighborhood, and trash all over the street, and it's kind of dicey, and wrecked houses and stuff. And somebody starts following you, and they corner you, or maybe they and their friend do. That's a different kind of fight, right? That's a totally different kind of fight. And that's why if you are walking home, maybe you bring a bayonet with you or something, or at least a padlock or something that you can up the ante with if you have to.
And Plusley talks about this in the medieval, early modern period, I should say, but in Germany. And just for our listeners who haven't read her wonderful book, what's the parallel to how she describes that period?
Well, one of the points that she makes is that there were actually eventually there were formal written rules, which I think is sort of a German thing. They take the things that they want to make it clear, which sometimes there's good and bad aspects to that. But there's all kind of rules about avoiding escalation of a fight, and then how you would conduct a fight. And one of them was not to stab people. So I recognized that right away. I mean, I knew people that stabbed somebody and knew people that got stabbed and whatnot, but I knew that often led to horrible consequences both for the person that got stabbed and the person who did the stabbing. So I'm like, oh yeah, I see that. So she's like, yeah, you're supposed to strike with the flat, and if the fight escalates beyond that, you can cut them, but there's an unwritten kind of rule that you shouldn't try to kill them. Maybe you try to cut their scalp, get their attention, or cut their hands so that they can't hurt you. And there was all these rules about escalation. So you weren't supposed to put your hand on your hilt. You weren't supposed to lay your sword on the table. You weren't supposed to scratch the sword on the cobblestones and make sparks, which I love. That's one of my favorite escalations. I really want to do that one day. And you're not supposed. And then they were all fined with a fairly substantial fine of 3 gulden. And one of the other provocations was to put 3 gulden on the table, meaning you're ready to pay the fine.
Oh, that's so bad.
And then once the fight starts, because they're Germans, and Germanic culture also up in the Norse cultures, were very interested in preventing vendettas and from preventing fights and feuds from breaking out into larger social conflicts. That's a lot of the laws that were in place. They knew they couldn't totally control everybody, especially the fact that part of what made warriors capable of fighting was the fact that they carried their honor with them. They carried their heirloom around with them. It's another thing I totally related to. And so you couldn't suppress people. You couldn't just replace all violence with state violence, the way we theoretically do in the United States. But in fact, that's only true for the comfortable people. Because for uncomfortable people in the United States, that's not the case. But so they would call peace. They'd say, peace, peace. Somebody sees a fight, just like you would call fire if you see the roof on fire in a building. You absolutely have to contain it. And they felt the same way or similar way about violence that could break out into like a bigger social conflict. All the friends of one group gets fighting with the other one, and then maybe they're in a guild, or they're part of a family, or they're part of a religious faction or something, and it can spread and become something that could threaten the stability of the community. So once you hear that peace, you have to stop fighting. So that means the fight could be just 3 or 4 minutes. So that's something to think about in terms of training, and in terms of what the philosophy and manuals in particular are trying to tell us about, what kind of fight they're getting you ready for.
Yeah, because the idea of what's a real fight just takes on a whole new meaning now when you add in all these variables. I mean, if you are...
There's so many variations of it, there's so many variations of it. And I recognize that, again, like I'm saying, we get into a fight in front of some bar on Decatur Street, and it might just be a frat guy, and I know I kind of have an idea what that's going to be like. If I punch him 2 times, he's probably going away. I can probably just talk to him and scare him a little bit. If I don't want to fight, he's going to go away. But if it's somebody that seems more serious, I know things are different, and I may have to, cut through all my rationalizations and things that I have in my head that tell me, that maybe it's not going to happen, or this is, I don't really want to fight. So I have all kind of ideas about how we're just going to shove each other and talk shit, and it's going to peter out. But you can tell by the look in somebody's eyes sometimes that's not going to happen. So that's when you have to dump all that.
Yeah. Have you read the Meditations on Violence, Rory Miller book? He defines various types of violence, and he makes a distinction between like predatory violence, and like the monkey dance, which happens, late night and when you're waiting in line to get into the pub or whatever, where two males start to pump up their chests in order to just, it's just social, sort of within the social realms of acceptable violence, but not really. Like those norms change also over time, but he makes that distinction, and it's a relevant distinction because, I think the example he uses are tigers, like two tigers who are fighting over status, over an area. They'll usually, like, even if they're badly wounded, they usually go away. But if a tiger attacks an animal for eating, that's predatory violence. It's a completely different thing. And the point of it is to get something from the prey, which is the prey itself. So two completely different, and you need to understand those things. And I think a lot of people in the modern world, or people who are in the comfortable zones of the more modern world, because I think there, as you say, there are a lot of people who are not there. They often have a skewed view of what violence is and how it works.
Yeah, there's a thing, I think it's part of what a lot of people get turned off on with Americans, but it's spreading out. It's all over the place now. It's not just in the United States. There's a certain kind of very narrow, shallow, two-dimensional way of looking at all kinds of things that's a very characteristic of the times we're living in. And it's very alien to the medieval mindset, because they always looked at things from multiple angles. You look at a medieval painting, and there's always so many different meanings on the painting. There maybe it's a religious tableau or a classical scene from Greek mythology or something, but it represents a war that's going on, and then there's a satire of certain people's faces that are in there. Maybe there's a character who's the fool, and they put the bishop's face on it with plausible deniability. I remember I met these Iranian guys that had this restaurant when I was in California, and I got friendly with them, and they were telling me how in Iran there was a painting of the Ayatollah where it was like a patriotic painting of the Ayatollah, but if you look really close, there was like a cock in his hair.
That's funny because
a lot of people that didn't like the Ayatollah would get that. Oh, I love the Ayatollah. They'd put the big painting up.
There's actually there are several paintings on church doors and stuff like that, where, like, that's the sense of humor in the medieval period as well, right? You see a donkey riding a monk, or stuff like that, which shows up, and you see those paintings sometimes on churches, and you go like, that's not really how you imagine. Like if you're looking back, if you ask the average person about the medieval period, what would happen if you were, not being religious or not enough or whatever, well, they'd burn you at the stakes. That's the general view of it, right?
It's so Puritan. It's completely the wrong.
It's a completely different
to look at medieval times. What I have and Shawnee, I want to hear your opinion on this, because there is one modern phenomenon that really appeals to me, or I think is fascinating, and it kind of makes me feel that that's how early modern period Festschule, tournament party / fighting occasion went down, because our modern tournaments are pretty strict. It's break, halt, this, and we got the shirt, and it's pretty clinical. But there's one kind of fighting done today that's not, and that's Haitian stick fighting. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
On Haiti,
I've seen a little Haitian machete drill. I've never seen Haitian stick fighting.
It's also, they actually have guilds. So on Haiti, there are 4 stick fighting guilds, just like, very similar to what you had back in Europe in the days. Cool. And they have these tournaments where they fight with no protection and with sticks. And it's a completely different attitude from most modern kinds of tournaments in any sports or any martial arts. It's because it's so rowdy. It's really chaotic. Everyone is standing there around, and the arena is not really well defined, and some guy might be in charge and he's now calling out who's going to do what, and everyone is singing the same songs and like that, doing the same dances. And some guys, he walks in, he picks up the stick, and then just by random, some guy walks across the arena as the fight is going on and is holding an AK-47, and you have no idea who he is. You know, is he the security guard, or is he just a random guy, you know, partying on? You don't know, but the atmosphere is awesome because everyone knows the songs and everyone knows the culture, so it all works out. And
that is such a good analogy. That's such a great. Doesn't that what your description sounds just like if you're looking at one of those paintings of
exactly.
a carnival where they're standing on the sword platforms and there's like people doing dances and
doing all these crazy things. And they had the songs. Now we have those old factual songs like these taunting rhymes, like football hooligans that they were singing to each other, right? But the main point is just to reinforce what you said. Like it was a much more colorful period than what we've been led to believe by this, you know, stuffy medieval movies from the 60s.
I'm actually going to try to introduce the AK at Swordfish.
Yeah. I really want to go and do Haitian stick fighting.
That clinical feel that you get, you know, especially a lot of American tournaments, is quite oppressive now. You know, it's like nobody's friends, and especially if it's one of these places where they don't have a bar to go to afterward. But, you know, I'm not a heavy drinker, man, but, you know, after you fight and, you know, you get through the whole ordeal of it, and you know, you want to drink and talk to your friends and stuff. But yeah, that it's like an American ideologue talking politics. It's like they've stripped all the nuance, they've stripped all the subtlety, all the other ways of looking at it. It's down to some dialectic, you know, argument. You know, do you hate America or do you support the troops in Iraq, or you know, whatever? Or do you hate the troops or do you support the war in Iraq, or one of those kind of things where it's just narrowed down to this flatness. Yeah, I think I feel that. Yeah, I want to hear the rowdiness and this yelling. That's what I liked about some of those earlier Swordfish videos. We would see the crowd beating the bleachers and, you know, yelling and laughing, and you know, we need that. We fucking need that, and that's where the context is so important to actually understand the context.
Yeah.
You know, and like what you were saying about the churches, it's so much beyond that. I mean, I had seen the churches when I was in the army over there, but I didn't, you know, I was a moron. I was a little kid. And we went to Italy a couple 3 years ago, and I walked into the Siena Cathedral, and the first thing I see on the floor is like this giant mosaic of a military treaty between Siena and like 5 other cities. And it's all the coats of arms of the cities that I instantly recognized. And I'm like, whoa, that's not super religious. Mm. And then the next thing I saw is like there's a mosaic on the floor of Hermes Trismegistus, which is this kind of spooky Neoplatonic pagan deity of magic. Mm. What the hell is that doing on the floor of the cathedral? You know, you walk into the Duomo. There's a painting of Sir John Hawkwood on the wall. I mean, shouldn't that be Jesus? You know, this is just what they're at. This isn't what's on their mind. Yeah. You know. They're hoping Sir John Hawkwood was going to crush Milan for them or whatever, but it's a different world. It's a really different world, and that is what I think. Your analogy of the kind of flat clinical tournament versus the rowdy Haitian stick fighting tournament, absolutely 100%. That Haitian stick fighting thing is much closer to one of the many variations of all of the warlike games that they incidentally still do. They still have the shoots and fests. They still have. I got to go see the barge fighting. You ever seen any videos of this? They get these boats and they have like lances. Yeah.
They're dressed like in white.
In Siena, the horse race they do in Siena, where it's super rowdy and people get hurt. You know, but that's how you channel all that monkey dance stuff.
Yeah, and it's also a way of you know, creating a culture for you to live in that is more nuanced and with more layers and depth, right? Because maybe I'm speculating a little bit here, but one reason why our modern tournaments can be said to be clinical then is because most people who do HEMA are not familiar with violence. So there needs to be like a really, really defined setting where now you're fighting and now you're not. And here's the safe guy, and there's the doctor, and everyone is worried. Anders and I talked about this in a previous episode when we discussed tournaments, about the pretty silly ideas many in early HEMA had about violence. And whereas in Haiti, because everyone understands the culture, you can have this, you know, and there's just this very human flow to it. And that's probably what you saw earlier. And it sounds like how you guys were play fighting, and you had some sort of familiarity with violence, and you grew up in a town that had these different factions. Like it was rowdy. It was more human, to use that word in a sense.
Yeah, right? It's rowdy, but a lot of it was those celebrations are kind of the saving grace of here. And this is one of it is part of what makes life worth living.
Yeah.
And that palio, that wild horse race they do in Siena.
Yeah.
That's mostly for the locals. Like it's the kind of thing that you would think would be a tourist draw, and it is, but apparently you can't even get into the town square, man. It's packed. It's all the locals from the surrounding area around Siena. They want to see that race because it's still there's different factions, and there's 17 contata in Siena, and they do the race twice. Each time there's 10 that race. So I guess probably the more prominent neighborhoods, but they have all their they do this whole medieval ritual in the beginning, which is amazing. I've just seen it on video. But part of the thing is that on purpose, of the 10 horses, 7 of them are good, 1 or 2 are fantastic, and 3 of them are bad. Or 5 of them are good, 1 or 2 fantastic, 3 are bad. My math is bad. But so and it's randomly determined. So if your neighborhood gets the bad horse, then you have to strategize and decide. Usually the goal is to block the rival neighborhood, So there's all this scheming and cunning that goes on, and that's all part of it too. Yeah. Of course, being Italian, you got to have that level. But that's all part. That's all part of exercising, getting some of the bad, violent impulses out of our society, and B, training everybody so that they can defend the community.
Mm. Yeah, because that was one of the main reasons of the Fechtschule of all too, right? You needed to motivate people to go train fencing because these towns, for example, were independent. They couldn't rely on anyone else to protect them.
Yeah, absolutely, and they still do that. Italy, they still have these crossbow contests all over the Italian towns. Just missed one of them when we were on our trip that they had at Luna, and they have a big plaque and everything for their modern crossbow shooting club on the Luna town walls, which are fantastic. The walls are amazing, but and they do it all over Germany and Switzerland too. They still have the Schützenfest, although I don't think it's as fun as it once was. But if you look at the famous woodcut of the Schützenfest from Zwickau in 1570s, whenever it was, and there's a bunch of guys fencing. It looks just like Meyer. But if you look at the whole picture, it's this wild ass party. That's probably a lot like the thing you're describing in Haiti. There's music and there's prostitutes and people racing, and they're throwing the kid on a blanket up in the air, and there's
didn't Anne Cluster, when she wrote the part of fencing tournaments, didn't she write that it was not uncommon for the organizer to dress up as a jester or a clown? Just to take down tensions a little bit. It says that's also something we can reintroduce. There's plans in the works actually. I'm not supposed to say anything, but we'll talk after. But not me, but some other people have consulted me on it. But not only was it common, it was routine. That was the guy that would manage the Schützenfest, and the reason for it is that these things were so fun that the princes and the minor nobles and stuff would come to them, even though a lot of them, they were usually urban events. And they had to shoot as well. And somebody, when you're on a range, you have to have range safety, especially back then when it's like people are packing gunpowder, there's barrels of gunpowder laid around, and then people are packing it into the guns. It's not like cartridges. And somebody's got to enforce the rules. And to enforce the rules on a prominent person from the town, or especially on a prince, what if it's the duke or the baron that's there, or the bishop? Because they did go and they would shoot, and they would do all the other goofy stuff like the long jump and the sack races and everything. But especially for the range, somebody's got to be able to enforce the rules, which they did by spanking people with a paddle. And because the guy's a clown, like a jester was in the princely court. The jester was allowed to speak truth to power and fart at prince and all that, and so that was like a disarming symbol. So you can say, look, Your Highness, you just walked in front of the guns, or you just aimed your gun at the crowd accidentally, so now you got to get spanked. You broke the range safety, so we don't want people dying. So they would, which is amazing.
You won't see that at a dynamic shooting competition today. I I'd love that, though. I'm going to introduce it to my IPSC.
We need to find more princes to participate.
Yeah. No, it's this, because I wanted to say something here, because you sometimes in pop culture, you get the rowdiness of medieval period is always, portrayed as like a bunch of people with soot in their face screaming that the witch should burn. And so you get that sort of rowdiness, but it's very, how would you say, it's like everyone was an idiot. And if you step into the cathedral in Siena, you realize fairly quickly that this is marvelous. This is something beyond anything that we can do.
Yeah, one of the things I do as a provocation sometimes to my friends and sometimes at lectures and so on, which never goes over well, is I say, okay, let's compare a town like Siena, where you've got at the peak, Siena's got 30, 40,000 people maybe at their peak. Or let's say Florence, maybe they have 50, 60,000, maybe 80, 100. It's probably not. It's debatable how many they had people there. Let's look at Florence, even though they're an outlier, and so I'm kind of cheating. But Florence, let's look at, some 50-year period in Florence, and then let's look at the architectural marvels they created, the top quality artists, the writers, all the geniuses that came out of there, the architecture, the public buildings that they created. And let's compare it to, say, I'm sorry to do this to Phoenix, but let's say Phoenix, Arizona, where you've got, 10 times the population, you've got electricity, you've got all kinds of electronic communication, you've got, internal combustion engine. What monuments of architecture exist in that town that could compare to anything, in Florence? How many fantastic artists have they produced in that same time period? It's a sobering thought. I pointed out, I think one time you and I were talking, I was pointing out about Strasbourg, that incredible cathedral there. When they built that, I think there was 35,000 people in Strasbourg. Now, I know people came from all over to help, but those cathedrals are all over.
Yeah,
every town nobody's even heard of have cathedrals and have town halls and have public granaries and all sorts of other public buildings, public market buildings and so on, that if they existed in the United States, it would be the most famous if it was in New Orleans, which has a lot of nice architecture, but all of our public architecture is horrible. It would be the most famous thing in New Orleans by far. It would be wildly famous, but it's in some anonymous town in, Hungary or Czech Republic or Bavaria or somewhere,
Yeah. Or
Italy.
This is when I get sort of my pulse goes up and I have to bite my lip not to speak out what I think about modern architecture, because if you're talking about pet peeves, I've sort of committed half of my adult life.
It's something to think about, because those people, I'm not trying to overhype it too much. I'm trying to get people to just break out of a certain way of thinking about that time.
Yeah.
But they were definitely, you're talking about the late medieval period in Central Europe, Italy, Flanders and whatnot. They were going through a golden age. They were going through a time of cultural genesis.
Yeah. Significant
cultural genesis that we have made into a caricature of guys with dirty faces saying burn the witch and does it weigh as much as it and all that. And, to the credit of the Monty Python guys, Terry Jones, I think, was making a lot of efforts for a long time to try to, counter some of those.
Yeah, he tried to rectify it. So how much is this, the Renaissance speaking ill of the middle period between the fall of the Roman Empire and their own period, and how much is this I know that you've got a pet peeve as well, if we're into pet peeves here, about the Victorian age and how they view history and with the exponential curve of development, like that, because that's really when I talk about modernity, it's the view on history as always developing to become that it's always better today than it was yesterday, and that's a very limited perspective, right? So
yeah.
So what's your view on that? Where does this image come from?
Yeah, like as you alluded to at first, the amusing thing about all that is that the terms Dark Ages and Middle Ages was invented in what we call the Middle Ages. I mean, think Petrarch coined the term Dark Ages back in the early 14th century at some point. And
yeah, I know we had this discussion privately, you and me, a while back, that in the medieval period and the early period, they knew at first, like all Charlemagne and all of those guys, they knew that something had been lost, and they tried to recreate it, and it became a symbol for a lost garden that they couldn't really recreate. But you said then that it quite soon they also realized that they had surpassed it in many ways.
Yeah, there's a moment where they realized it, and that came in fits and starts and in different places, and that was quite a bit later than Charlemagne. But yeah, and I think there's a shorthand on this. This is one of the problems with the Victorian thing. I don't hate the Victorians. They're probably no more crazy and screwed up than we are. But it's just the persistence of some of those tropes, and they lay on top of real things. So they're always guiding us away from the reality and into this weird little cliche that ties it all up and makes it comfortable to think about it. Because then we got to think about what we lost when we lost all that. Charlemagne was looking quite a bit back to Rome. And that's the trope about the Middle Ages, is that, Rome was great, that everybody was filthy, and then we kind of became like the Romans again, in the 18th century or something. But and there's this huge gap in between, and then the French Revolution comes, and we throw out the Ancien regime, and we're done with all the filth, right? It was all total nonsense.
Yeah.
But so the medieval people, this dovetails into what I wanted to get into about how do you study the Middle Ages. The medieval people were obsessed with classical culture, and what was available to somebody like Charlemagne or to some of his scribes or his clerks that were working for him, or to the popes at that time, and what was available to somebody like Dante or Petrarch a couple hundred years later is very different, and their perception of an understanding of the classical period really evolved. And by the time you get to somebody like Aeneas Silvio Piccolomini, who became Pope Pius II or first, Pope Pius II, I think. Anyway, he was this Italian courtier. By the time you can read a lot of his stuff, I'm sure it's translated into Swedish. A lot of it's translated to English, and it's some of the most beautiful writing you'll ever read. It's breathtaking. It's the kind of writing you read, and I, as a wannabe writer, feel like, oh my God, why am I even trying to write? This is pointless. I'm so far beyond, beneath, the skill of this guy. But I learned what they were doing is they were such experts on that classical period. They had actually learned to imitate the writing style, the personal letters that were written by guys like Cicero and Seneca and all these people that they admired. Pliny the Elder. This is another thing I used to do to troll people. Okay, in lectures sometimes, just as a little tweak, a little joke, is that there's a. This is because I like to tweak the English sometimes too. But there's a couple of etiquette manuals that came out around the same time in the beginning of the second quarter of the 15th century, one in England, one in Italy, one in, I think it was Venice. But the one in England was saying, if you're at a dinner party, don't blow your nose on your neighbor's sleeve. Don't piss in the fireplace. Don't take a shit in the stairwell.
I've told you this, Axel. Many occasions that you shouldn't do that.
Right, that's true. You shouldn't. And then the Italian one is saying, like, if you're speaking to somebody who is deeply committed to Epicurean ideals, don't hold forth too long in Neoplatonism, and don't do it in Greek. It's just vulgar. Stick to that.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
I
also want to run into someone who's deep into Epicureanism at a party. It hasn't happened.
Happens so rarely these days. But and also like what you said with the format of writing, not just like the style of mimicking the style of Cicero, because that could actually be a little bit stale, although it does show great insights. But they also like that the format of philosophical. Not debate, but how you phrase a philosophical work of writing. That stays on for a long time, like having a discussion where, like, I think like it pops to mind now is Pizan, city. The city. What's it called in French? The city of the ladies, and all these works. like they're phrased as a conversation between lady philosophy and the author, and that goes back, of course, to antiquity as well. That's how they. And if you back up a little bit, like Boëthius, like it continued. It never really died. It through the Dark Ages, you see these intellectuals and sometimes the more Germanic intellectuals trying to mimic as well the old Roman customs and become Romans in a way, right? So it carries on, and it's actually it's a very sort of strange way of looking at history when you divide it into periods, because none of these periods are actually divided for the people in them, right? It's an arbitrary division.
Yeah, that's always when you look back later. I mean, this goes on forever. Is the Romans looked at the Greeks? Is it Plutarch's Lives where you compare Roman lives to Greek lives that are similar, or is it some? Yeah. So I mean, this just goes on. I want to segue back into something we talked about before when it comes to honor, because one criticism we got from the first episode was that you can't compare French honor culture to Japanese honor culture. 15th century honor is very different from 1450s. These kind of not arguments based on knowledge, not on wisdom. But what we see throughout history is people being inspired by previous events, which makes perfect sense because so far this is the only planet we know about. So where the hell else are we supposed to look for, how to deal with our lives? But then, applying them to their own situation and solving their own problems. I mean, this is so much more about layers, and it's more about wisdom than knowledge.
So, and they really, I'm sorry, I was getting carried away.
No, I was basically done. Go on. I want to hear your rant.
My rant is that they really went deep into it. I mean, you had condottieri, you had soldiers, people. You look at somebody like Benvenuto Cellini. Obviously, he's an outlier, but this guy's he's a goldsmith, he's a sculptor, he's a soldier in the militia.
Yeah, he's such a wild guy. I love that book. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, he killed commanders in the siege of Rome. In fact, he may have accidentally triggered the sack of Rome, 1520, by killing the commanders.
Oh yeah,
the guy was an extraordinary soldier and very erudite. Typical these people, and yes, Cellini was an outlier. He's a really remarkably good artist, but he wasn't that much of an outlier. There's a lot of people in Florence like that. There was a lot of people in all these Italian city-states, and also in Flanders, German-speaking areas and so forth, who are basically today, a guy like that would be a PhD level, famous, deep expert on classical philosophy, literature, and history.
Yeah, and running a mercenary company.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very common. So these people were at such a deep level of knowledge, and I mean, I'm just getting into that now because I'm working on like a sort of a side project to make some money. I'm working on like a D&D book, and it's based on. I've been doing these books that are based on like HEMA, basically, and I delved into the culture of magic and all the stuff that you see in the fencing manuals. We always skip over because like, what the hell is that? Magic spells in the 3227A or whatever. But I've been reading about Neoplatonism and, Pythagorean cults and stuff because that's what they were into in the Middle Ages. They were super deep into, in fact, I would say arguably you could say that the real factions philosophically in places like Florence or even probably Nuremberg or, Bruges or somewhere was not so much Christian, even though they were Christian. But what they're really into was, are you an Aristotelian, like a scholastic, or are you a humanist? Are you a Neoplatonist? Where do you stand on these debates? And like you said, it's sort of a timeless thing because they were picking up on debates that the Arabs were having 3 or 4 centuries earlier. The Arabs, the Persians, the Moors, Kurds, all these people in the Middle Eastern areas. They were all picking up on they were reviving and getting very energetic and no doubt killing each other over arguments that the Greeks and Romans were having.
Yeah.
They picked it right up. You have whole towns that even in the Middle East, there's apparently a town in what's now Iraq where they became Neoplatonists again and it had to be squashed.
That's awesome.
Into that. So and this idea of having that flexible thought pattern that's so typically medieval is something I also try to get across. There's an anecdote I'd like to tell about if you studied medicine, okay, at any time from like maybe 1220 to, probably 1700, and in a University of Bologna, University of Paris, wherever, you're going to study 3 auctores principally. You're going to study Hippocrates, everybody knows about. You're going to study Galen, who was a Greek physician that used to sew up gladiators. He ended up becoming a personal physician to a bunch of emperors. And you're going to study Avicenna, who is an Arab. Real name is Ibn Sina something, and then like 17 more syllables. But he was like a guru on Aristotle and some of the other Greek experts. And that's where they were getting the glosses, was from these Arab guys. But so if you're a medical student, you've got to contend with the fact that you're maybe theoretically you're a Christian, you're what we would call a Catholic today. So you're reading a pagan guy, Hippocrates, who's talking all about Hermes and Apollo and the gods, and he's got, half of the medicine stuff is talismans and magic, and then some of the stuff that they thought was superstition, because these people weren't naive, but it turns out was really important, like boiling your instruments before surgery. They thought that was just like a kind of a magical good luck thing, but all 3 of those auctores say to do it, or cleaning the wound out with distilled vinegar and things like that. So they knew about things that we've now later on figured out were totally legit, but they could never be sure what parts of this were mythology and which were real. And when they're reading Avicenna, he's talking about, Allah. And when they're reading Galen, I think he was Christian, but he was some kind of weird heresy of Christians, like an Arian or something. So they have to contend with these 3 different philosophies in order to learn medicine. And there's stuff in there in all 3 of them. Avicenna is talking about the power of some jinn, that's going to clean your surgical instruments if you boil them, that because of some Aristotelian concept of hot and cold and wet and dry, whatever. And that you may take that with a grain of salt or a little bit of tongue in cheek, but you do it anyway because it seems to work. And you have to be able to be flexible enough to be comfortable being you're Christian and you're some kind of version of it regionally in Europe in your own time. And yet you're able to read these other auctores in an uncensored way. Later on, these things were censored, a lot of them. They took a lot of the pagan and Muslim stuff out. The Jesuits and so on did that. But, in the Middle Ages, you're comfortable living there. You're comfortable juggling these things. And that's something that a modern mindset struggles with.
Absolutely. I think that if you are forced to grapple with what is to your mind outrageous ideas, it really opens your mind. It's like people who love to read sci-fi or something, and it kind of broadens their vision a little bit in these days. And it sounds a bit similar. I know it's definitely been true in my case. The more weird stuff you read, like the more perspectives you get, basically. And it seems like what these guys were going through too. Another reason, this is a speculation again, I want to hear what you think about this, Sean, but I only bring it up because you said something that I really liked about Middle Ages and early modern period. It was a time when your authority only stretched as far as your authority actually stretched. Like if you couldn't get to someone, you had no authority over them. And if you live in a society like that, where you have that amount of freedom, doesn't that do something to like how you approach things and how you think about things too? I mean, I doubt Cellini would have stopped at a stop sign, at a road where no other cars are there and there's no camera. I think he would just have gone.
The guy who murdered his competition with a dagger to the neck and dropped his knife with his initials on it and then get caught and then get pardoned because there's a new pope. No, he probably didn't stop at the stop sign if no one stopped him.
He's had a feud with the Pope's nephew or something, and he starts taking pot shots outside of the guy's window. And he's a fantastic shot. This is the guy, and he says he claims he was hunting pigeons. Oh, this pigeon's been aggravating me for weeks. It's sticking its head out of the rock. It just happens to be right next to your nephew's window. Total coincidence. I can't believe you're freaking out. And he's probably correct. This is the Middle Ages. There probably was a pigeon. And on one level, that was the whole issue. But another level, he knew exactly what he was fucking doing, and he almost got killed over that.
Yeah. I love that you can. I love to live in a time where you can reference a feud with a pigeon as an excuse for your behavior.
yeah, man. What's going on with the pigeon? Oh God, yeah. And there's another time I got to tell you about the feud between the Roman Empire and the whale in the Black Sea. That's in the copy of Secret History. It's fantastic. But anyway, yeah. So I say, look, to really just summarize, I know we're getting close to long on time, but study. If you want to learn the Middle Ages, first learn the classical stuff that appeals to you. And like I said in the beginning of this, different people approach history in different ways. I'm kind of like an intuitive approach. Some people are more meticulous. Some people like to collect data. There's a lot of classical sources that are really fun to read. There's excellent translations. You talked about Herodotus. I'm going to tell you my anecdote in a minute from Herodotus. But Herodotus, Thucydides, Tacitus, Julius Caesar, Xenophon, these are so accessible. These are not weird stories. It's not like thee and thou Shakespeare stuff or, Canterbury Tales where you can barely get through a paragraph without getting a headache.
Yeah, Xenophon is really he's really down to earth, which makes everything he writes so much more impressive too.
Yeah, and if you're reading Caesar, oh my God, you hear his voice. There's this wonderful scene in Gallic Wars where Caesar's contemplating invading Germania, the Alemanni tribe that are on the other side of the Rhine from where he is in Gaul, and he sends him a letter saying, I don't know if you know who I am. I'm Julius Caesar. I crushed the Helvetii a few months ago. I crushed these and the Aedui and the Cimbri and all these people. And they send a letter back saying, oh, Julius Caesar, yeah, we know who you are. You're the guy that we hear about all the time. Your friends in the Senate keep asking us to kill you. We're considering it. Not sure if it's a good idea or not yet. You probably don't know who we are. We're the such and such faction of the Alemanni. We went on the warpath 40 years ago, and we haven't laid under a roof in all that time. Oh. And if you want to know who we've defeated, then go into your Roman books and look up who used to live here and what their reputation.
This is exactly what we're talking about, Sean. You are basically reading Caesar as an episode of Sons of Anarchy.
Sure, that's what it is.
That's what we like, because it is what it is. Yeah, exactly. It's very basic human behavior.
Yeah, sure. And these things are accessible. These are fun, and for different people, some people might want to read Epicurus. You want to throw a really good party, learn about that. Some of the philosophy is fascinating. I've been, plunge into Hermes Trismegistus and all these. Or if you like gadgets, if you like inventions, read about Archimedes and Heron of Alexandria. And you try to figure out what the fuck the Antikythera mechanism is. Like this bronze computer that they found, in the bottom of the Med from the 3rd century. But familiarize yourself with whatever classical authors you relate to. Try a few. If you don't like it, move to another one. But you can find some. Almost anybody that can read will find some of these. And if you can't read, listen to the audiobook because they got those too. Yeah. Start there. And then the combination of all those are different enough that'll start getting you familiar with the idea of different perspectives. Get used to the idea that there's multiple ways of looking at things because that's how these people were. There's never one way of looking at anything. Yeah. And I'd say then start to look at the art. Look for the art that you relate to. Look for art that pleases you, that you think is cool. The art was, you like sword fighting, you like violent stuff, you like to see somebody getting stabbed through the face. Look at that and then read about the artist, read about their life a little bit, as much as you can stand. When you start getting bored, move on. But start to write down the names, get familiar with those. Go over there, go to Europe if you can. Go to the medieval town center of some of these towns because there's literally thousands of them. And that will change your life. You go to one of those places where everything is bespoke, everything is unique, everything is a work of art. Every bricklayer was trying to express his admiration to God, and not in some crude way, not in some simplistic way, but in a subtle, interesting way, by just the daily work that he did, or that she did. Because there's a lot of lady artisans too. It's a much more variegated world than we thought. And then, this could be difficult for some people. Getting a little comfortable with reading some of the Christian stuff, reading a little bit of the Bible. There's fun parts of the Bible. If Alex from Clockwork Orange could read the Bible and enjoy it, so can you. Find some part. It doesn't have to. It could be 1%, but you'll just familiarize yourself a little bit with that, and then read a little bit of the Arab stuff. There's a wonderful personal account by a Syrian knight called Osama ibn Munkid. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that.
Oh, we spoke about him.
Yeah, I referenced him in one of the other episodes. The Crusades According to the Muslims is his book, right?
No.
Oh, it's another one.
A different one.
Oh, okay.
Osama is called an Arab Syrian gentleman's account of the blah, blah, blah. This guy's not ideological. and it's full of crazy anecdotes and just all kinds of really interesting, cool things.
I need to read this.
A lot, like you were joking around about beefs with pigeons and whales earlier. There's a lot of beefs in that book with like lions or leopards. There's an assassination where somebody brought a leopard into a room and slammed the door, like brought a leopard in a sack and threw it in a room and slammed the door, and it killed everybody in there except one guy that managed to hide on a ledge. There's a point where there's a lot of detail, a lot of really interesting detail, the kinds we're usually looking for, like, running lance duels between different cavalrymen and stuff, and the use of how effective the armor was, the bafflement at like some of this Frankish armor that was just blocking everything, the use of like naphtha fire grenades, and then a lot of like just sort of funny, saucy, like he talks about he's in a bathhouse in Aleppo, which is under Frankish control at the time, Norman probably, and he's just scandalized that these Franks have come in there and they've got their wives in the bathhouse with them. And he's talking about how there's a guy in the bathhouse who shows up regularly who will shave your pubic hair and all your body hair off for a fee. And this probably Norman knight is in there with his wife, and they're enjoying the bath. And he sees the guy with the razor, and he says, "Oh, come here, do me." And he gives him some money, and he shaves all his body hair off. And then he says, "Do madame." And so here he is in this Arab bathhouse, shaving his wife. And this dude was like, "Yeah, these Franks are just a filth," but he worked for the Franks for a while. He met personally and knew Saladin. He's a fascinating guy. He's a fairly cranky, old, mean guy. He lived in his 90s. But you can read that. But I mean, you can read the Arabian Nights and get a little idea of the Arab perspective. And all this will gradually build you up to one day you'll be able to read some of the Arab and Persian, especially scholars that the medieval Latin people were fascinated with. The guys who invented distillation of alcohol, which we really all appreciate today. Things like that. These guys that built the robots, the automata. And then when you've done that, then start to read some of the more accessible medieval primary sources. Forget the stuffy historians, the high level analysis. Just start to read some of the primary sources and come to the high level analysis later when you've got something to bring to it. And all that will be very humbling, I promise you, but it's really interesting. Well, and it's going to help you understand fencing.
Judging by your character, Sean, it also does a lot to your daily life and like how you act and are. You're definitely one of the most colorful and entertaining persons I've ever had the pleasure to hang around with. I still listen to Trombone Shorty, thanks to you.
Oh yeah, man, Trombone Shorty's the best. Yeah, I remember that.
Still got the CD. And
we picked you up in Houston in the car.
Yeah. And Sean really looks at me with that gangster look and goes, "You ever heard of trombone?" I'm scared, like, "Yeah, I have heard of trombone." It's like, "No, you've not heard of trombone." And he puts on Trombone Shorty and just rocks out in that old car of yours. It's amazing.
Yeah, I blasted Trombone Shorty, then peeled out, and like we were going like 90 miles an hour. There's back streets in Houston.
Yeah. I also remember you showing me around New Orleans when I was there, and just the knowledge you had and the attitude, because you made everything come alive and not just, well, there's another stuffy statue, there's another one, but you gave this whole backstory, and it was obvious that you are really living that story, and I've internalized your home in a way that I think it's, if people have that and they're able to do that, I think they will have a lot of enriching in their lives, how to say,
the shared culture of our ancestors that makes it come alive.
Absolutely. It makes every day a little bit more magic when you're walking around and you just see those things around you or you know about it.
Don't you guys do that in Sweden? Don't you have that connection to ancient things that are all around you? Yeah. I mean, I know Anders, you talked about the humor that's built into the Bronze Age petroglyphs and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're elves, so we kind of float around.
No. I mean, I'm still, I'm regularly, like you've got these occasions where you can get that through literature as well, like you say. Like I remember reading Saint Augustine, and when he sails off from Africa to go to Rome. And you could sort of, it's such a privilege that we live in a time where you can pick up that book for, no money at all. You order it on Amazon or whatever, and you get it a few days later, and you can pick it up and you can read it, and then all of a sudden you're reading the words of someone who lived so long ago, and you're with them there as they're sailing off over the Mediterranean to Rome to start a new life, and their mother is on the waving them off. But I can get the same sense, like I've written about this as well. When I go out hunting, I sit there and there's a chip of flint lying there on the ground, and you immediately recognize that this is a chip of a flint stone that someone has worked on. That's why it's there.
Maybe another fellow hunter, right?
Yeah, and on the other side of that field, there's a 19th century house, and I know for a fact that some of the, like up on the hillside, there are a few cairns from the Bronze Age. So in this, and you go up there and you overlook, and there's the medieval or the new church right next to the medieval ruins of the old church. So yeah, I think this is what really drives me towards history, and it's always driven me towards history.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same. I mean, it's partly a large degree to the area I grew up in, and Anders I think has the same because he also grew up in a very particular area of Sweden. But I was really raised with the local culture and the stories, from an early age, thanks to my parents, but also just by being in that environment of the fiddlers and the these melancholic little cottages out in the forest and the midnight sun and that whole thing. And I also was I was raised on the stories of Vikings and before that and at later periods, and it just gave me a complete whole to relate to. And reading Tacitus or Xenophon or something, it can feel like it's really far away, but it isn't, because it's still part of the same human story. And these classics are also classics for a reason. They usually says something very profound and interesting about what it means to be a human and what it means to be alive, and it reinforces everything else around you too, down to like the local folk story. Like it can, from the right perspective, it can really come down to one big whole, though with these thousands of layers that you mentioned, thousands of perspectives.
You need that depth. You need that depth of detail.
Yeah.
To get the charge. There's some work you have to do before you start getting the results back.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think we're almost an hour and a half. This is the longest episode, but I feel like we only just started this conversation. So maybe we can have you back on the show some other day.
Yeah, I'd love to, man. It was a great discussion. I really enjoyed it, just on the level of a discussion.
I want to milk you more about these awesome, hilarious anecdotes that you've dug up when you've done your research. I want an episode focused on that.
Yeah, let's do that, about the violence, alcohol, lead poisoning, politics, and the economy of historical periods, and all the shenanigans that came out of that. Right. Thank you so much for joining us, Sean, and we'll talk again soon, I hope.
Yeah, give our regards to all our friends in New Orleans.
Oh yeah, I'm supposed to say Christian Trother says hi, Rebecca Boyd says hi, Marjorie says hi.
Oh. Nice.
Send our love to all of them.
Yeah. Is Kip still around? Is he still fighting?
He is. He doesn't fence with us too much anymore. He's living kind of a chaotic life at the moment. Shacked up with some stripper, I think. But,
okay, this is going on the show, by the way. Just saying. I'm still recording.
This is a family show. Send him my regards too. He's a great guy.
I haven't seen him since COVID started. They were rather cavalier about the concept of contamination, and kind of old. So be careful, man.
All right.
I'm sure I'll see him within a few months.
All right, so thank you so much, Sean. It was great having you on, and let's talk again soon. All right.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
You are here on a matter of honor. I am here to assure you settle it honorably.
Junkwitze Lehrer, Gottlieb haben, Frauen ja Herren, so extrem.
I see you handle your weapon well.
I have been known to keep my tip up.
Morning.
Why don't you make it up like a couple of good fellows?
Don't expect decency. You ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man.
You ready, gentlemen?